we are joined by Mr. Patrick Shen, a director and cinematographer who founded Transcendental Media. His works include the award-winning films Flight from Death, The Quest for Immortality, The Philosopher Kings, La Source, and the South by Southwest 2016 film In Pursuit of Silence. His films have received 24 awards and 11 nominations and have been featured on the TED Blog, CNN, Huffington Post, New York Times, LA Times, Boston Globe, and the Washington Post. Before we get started with our interview, I wanted to take a page from your book, Mr. Shen, and begin this interview with a minute of silence. At this time, I'd like to invite our listeners to pause the audio for 1 minute so you're able to participate in this grounding exercise.
That was a fast minute.
Cool, we'll now start with our questions. So, to start, you have an amazing film titled In Pursuit of Silence, where you explore the art of silence. What is the importance of silence in this creative thought process?
The importance of silence in the creative thought process?
Yes.
I think that there's very little space in this day and age for us to sit in a quiet space and gather our thoughts. I think historically that's where many of the best ideas have come from. All of us want to bring the best version of ourselves to the table. We want to bring the best idea that we've got to the table. And that necessarily requires us to set aside time, be alone, and think about what those things are. The world has obviously gotten crazy noisy. Noise is ubiquitous. It's literally seeping into every aspect of our lives, even the way that we think our way through situations. And I think to have that time to sort of collect our thoughts, know who we are, know what we believe about the world, especially in this day and age where we have sort of such intense kind of division in the world, not just here in the States, but elsewhere too. It's vital that we take the time to just even think about and consider who it is that we are and what it is that we believe, rather than just be in a space where we're responding, right? That's what noise does. Noise it creates a situation where you're reacting to it, but it's in quiet or silence where we can actually be proactive. We can engage fully and be proactive with our thoughts. So yeah, from a creative standpoint, it is a vital part of the process.
Totally.
Yeah.
So obviously you're on a high school campus where there is hardly any silence, as you may have seen. So how do you think that influences our creative minds and the minds of the next generation in general?
How does the noise of the campus affect?
Yes.
The one thing that noise does is it has a way of like tranquilizing our brains. It's almost like a white noise that filters out even the sound of our own voices. And so, yeah, if you're in a noisy situation, it has the potential to kind of cloud your thinking. Of course, when we're in a silent space on the opposite side of the spectrum, a purely, completely quiet space, it can also be a very loud experience. I had this experience in an anechoic chamber when I was making In Pursuit of Silence. I was in a number of them throughout the filming of the project, and these are rooms that are 98%, 99% silent, soundproof. The one that I was in particular was, at the time, the quietest, on record as the quietest room on the planet, the quietest space on the planet. It was like negative 15, I can't remember now, it was like negative 15 decibels or something like that. Of course, 0 decibels is the human threshold of hearing, but this room was negative 15 below that, so you could only detect levels that low with very sophisticated equipment, or I think certain animals can detect levels that low. But what happened was it was almost just as loud as being out in a very, very noisy environment, because I had my thoughts to contend with. So I don't think it's like pure silence that we often look for. It's a sort of sense of silence, I guess, a sense of quiet, a sense of kind of agency where we feel like we have some kind of like control over our own mind, our own thoughts, and our own environment. We require sound. We require these sort of visual and sonic cues when we enter a space to help us navigate those spaces. So if there's no sound, it's actually a very disorienting experience for somebody. But yeah. So I think the idea of noise in an educational setting is huge. I mean, there have been studies upon studies that have laid out this very well-researched fact that students who live, or rather students who attend a school that's particularly noisy, say near a like train track, are 1 to 2 years behind in their studies, their reading levels, their math levels. So there's like real-world implications to having a noisy environment. And being in a creative space, a creative high school like this, having a noisy environment outside, you know, could really, really have a significant impact on the quality of the work being done here. You know, that I don't think this is anywhere near the schools that I filmed at where they had train tracks, like elevated train tracks right outside the window. I mean, that's insane. This is nothing like that. I mean, this is the room that we're in here is actually pretty darn quiet by most standards. So I think you guys are doing okay. Yeah.
So especially with our younger generations, with social media and the internet, YouTube bloggers have started to blur the lines between documentary filmmaking and vlogging, as you would most definitely know. So what do you think the key differences are between the two?
Between vlogging and documentary filmmaking? That's an interesting question. Let me think about that for a second. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess the key difference between vlogging and documentary filmmaking obviously is what direction the camera is pointed in, right? That's like the glaring difference. Mm-hmm. Vlogging typically inspires kind of an introspection, right? Because you're looking at yourself, and you are the star and subject and voice of that piece of work that you're creating. Whereas, you know, documentary filmmaking, sometimes your voice is obviously present. Your signature is kind of sort of infused in the fabric of the film, but you're very much looking outward. You're trying to understand something about the world outside. Sometimes you're trying to understand the world sort of interior as well, inside, but through looking outward, I guess, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I don't know. That's the glaring difference. And obviously, like, one's cinematic and one isn't necessarily cinematic. One is more sort of an effort to kind of just communicate some spoken ideas. It's more like news or journalism or like this personality kind of driven piece of work rather than a piece of cinema. So I think they're quite different, I would say. There are filmmakers that kind of blur the lines. You know, you have people like Michael Moore who make documentaries featuring themselves, and they're talking to the camera, and it's very much about themselves and their personality and how they navigate these situations. So you do have a hybrid, I guess, of the two in some cases. But yeah, I mean, the documentary genre is so vast and varied. There is a whole subsection of documentaries that are very much like vlogs. I'm sure we could find many parallels there. Yeah.
Since there are so many filmmakers these days, especially on YouTube, that are making like vlogs or films of the sort, that maybe aren't putting as much thought or as much like outlook into their films, as someone who does do that, who is able to really communicate the ideas that documentaries are supposed to, how do you respond to those filmmakers who maybe, for lack of a better word, don't know what they're doing?
Well, you know, I'm not going to judge what people are doing on YouTube. You know, there's a time and place for all of that. There's a time and place for all sorts of films, voices. As I said, within the documentary space itself, there is a whole variety of approaches. You know, I don't know. I mean, I think this idea of telling stories is as varied as there are personalities in the world. You know, it's obviously a little different. I guess, what am I trying to say? I guess your typical kind of YouTube vlog or whatever is quite different than kind of the cinematic, we'll call it cinematic documentary. But, at its core, there are some similarities. I mean, it's this effort to sort of use technology, use the image, and use sound to tell a story, communicate ideas. I mean, so at its core, they're very similar kind of like motivations, I guess. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, yeah, I don't judge them. I don't really have any critique for them. I think, okay, so I'll say this, I guess. I think what YouTube and all these social media platforms help with is that it creates a platform for people to use their voices, right? That's very core. We understand that. But I think that is so vital in our world, right? That people are encouraged to use their own voice and find that bravery and that courage to use their own voice. And before YouTube, we didn't have platforms like that. Like before all these social media platforms, we didn't have these channels through which to use our voices and to find our voices. Like, what a great tool to use in order to be prolific with the work we're creating. Like there's like vloggers that have made more videos and more films than I ever will in a lifetime. They're incredibly prolific. And in the process of making these videos, these vlog videos, what have you, they're learning a great deal about themselves. They're learning a great deal about the world around them because they're using these vlogs and these channels to talk about something out there, happening out there in the world, right? And they're talking about the stories that are developing in the world. I don't know. So I think at its core, they're fantastic. Is it art? Is it cinema? I don't know. I mean, that's a different conversation. I don't think so. It's just a different animal, it's a different thing.
That's a very uplifting answer for a possibly salty question. So thank you. Yeah. On the next topic, kind of piggybacking off of that idea, there are so many mediums a creative can express themselves through. Why did you choose film and TV as your means of expression?
I think growing up, I wasn't a very talkative kid. I guess you could say I was kind of shy, definitely introverted, and I didn't feel like the spoken language was my native tongue in a way, and so that's why I gravitated towards music. Music was my first love, and there was something about that process that was very cathartic, therapeutic. What I loved most about it was this kind of instant gratification that you get through music, where you have this thought, you have an idea, you have a feeling, and you can, by yourself in a room with a guitar or another instrument, and translate that intangible thing inside of yourself and create this whole other thing that you can then kind of send out into the world, share with people in these sort of bite-sized 3-minute, 4-minute ways, And I loved that about music. And when I discovered film, of course, that has a strong musical sound element in it. I loved all of that. I loved it. I loved the language of film. It felt more aligned with who I was. And it felt like kind of I discovered my native tongue. It just felt this. I thought to myself, this is how I'm going to speak to the world through this particular language. This works for me. This is me. Yeah.
Cool. So, on that topic, how did that transition work for you, especially between music and film? Like, how did one lead to another, and how did that feel for you?
So I came into film through music. I was in a metal band called Apocalypse in high school, and we needed a music video. That was the thing to do back then. MTV was huge. MTV was huge back then. It was all about the video. And so someone in the band needed to learn how to make a music video. I volunteered. I found out about this video production class. I think it was actually a class for adults. It was called like a regional occupational program. It was part of like this set of classes for adults, but it was taking place at another high school, and so I would go there. when I wasn't working at the record store that I worked at, I would go to these classes, I think 2 nights a week, and learn about filmmaking. It was like a video production class. And I eventually did make a music video for my band, but it was what I discovered there about what I could do by combining these elements of sound and visuals. And again, this sort of intangible thing that people sprinkle into the thing, the creation that they're making, that I found magical. Yeah.
Thank you. So, with documentaries specifically, there's obviously an unpredictability about the footage that you will capture because it isn't scripted. So, how do you prepare yourself and your team for that unpredictability? And how flexible do you need to be on set, including having B-roll for possible unexpected moments?
That's a great question. How do you prepare for that? So much like you do with a scripted project, you go in with a very specific idea in mind. And like anything, like with any other film, you become very intimate with the themes of your film, the characters of your film, and the potential various trajectories that that story's going to take throughout the course of you telling the story. And so you're doing a lot of work up front, thinking about the form, the structure, trying to predict as much as possible, knowing all along that it's probably going to change and it's not going to go as planned. But it's that roadmap that you take with you into those situations, those unpredictable situations, that really helps you make those split-second decisions. You know, as filmmakers, you're always making decisions, right? And when you're on set, you don't have time to like say to the crew, hold on, guys, you know, I got to go back. I got to just hang out for a bit and I got to think about this. Like, you don't have time. Your actors are waiting. The clock is ticking. Money's being put into every single moment that you have that crew on set. And so you have to decide, I think, before you go into these situations, from what foundation you are making decisions. You know, you have to know that film so well. You have to be so intimate with the themes of your film that when you do have to make a split-second decision on something, whether it's, we got to move the camera from here to there, or if you're making a documentary, that character just ran up the hill and I don't know where he's going. Do we want that shot? This happened to us in Haiti so many times. Like, we were shooting in the mountains and our subjects would just like start racing away from the scene and like run up this hill, and there's like this language barrier, and we'd have to decide all the time, like, he might be going to, like, you know, tend to his cows in the mountain who are grazing, and do we want that? Or he's going to go slaughter a cow for this. And it's like, do we need this stuff? Like, you constantly have to be asking yourself, do we need this? Do we need this? Is this part of the story? Does this support the story? Does this support the themes of my film, the things that I truly care about, the things that are driving the story that I have in my mind? I have to determine whether or not these sort of unpredictable things unfolding are in support of that or have potential to support that. And so you have to make these very, very quick decisions. Hopefully that answered your question.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And going with that, obviously, through your experience, you've been able to learn how to trust your own decision and your decision-making. But for us young filmmakers, we're still developing that. So how do you learn to trust your intuition, especially as a documentary filmmaker?
I don't know if I have an answer to that, other than because it's such a big question, you know, and it's like, it's so fundamental to like becoming human. But what I will say is that you learn that, I think, through being as prolific as possible. And I say this all the time to people who ask me about, how do I start making films? Like, how do I know what kind of films I want to make? And it's like, you make as much work as possible. You make as much work as possible. You try to put as much of yourself into those films. And over time, you will start to make discoveries about who you are, the kind of films that resonate with you, and what you'll be able to determine or distinguish between, you know, what your gut is telling you versus what the world is telling you to do in those moments. And that's back to the noise conversation. You know, like, the world is so noisy. There's many, many voices speaking into our lives. We have to have the ability to discern between what aligns with me and what doesn't align with me, you know, or what aligns with you and what doesn't align with you. And that's something that comes over time, but you can't learn that, I think, by just sitting around and doing nothing. I was going to say playing video games, because this is such a hot topic at my house. Like I love video games. I totally let my kids play video games. It's all good, but like we have to limit it. It's because like they'll suck up, like they'll like use up 5 hours of the day playing video games. But what the skill that I want them to develop is that skill that is very unique to when you find yourself in a quiet situation, not really knowing what to do with your time, and those sort of original ideas kind of bubble up and develop, and you find ways to fill that time that are interesting and meaningful to you. It's so vital to the creative process. It's back to what we were saying earlier about this quiet and what quiet can do. And what noise does as a tranquilizer, and how that holds us back from what we're supposed to be doing or what we could be doing with our time. Anyway, not to harp on video games. Like I said, I'm all about it, but in moderation.
Totally.
So I'm going to the dad mode all of a sudden.
Oh, of course. So, on a little bit more of a fun note, what's the craziest or most unexpected thing that's happened on your set?
So one of the earliest unpredictable things that happened to me while on set was when I was making a film in high school, actually. I had just seen Silence of the Lambs and was obsessed with that movie, and wrote this script called Fifth Shade of Darkness about this evil cult called END, which stood for Evil Never Dies. It was amazing. It was awesome. And we, my friend and I, we cast adult actors. We actually put notices up, like in publications and stuff, and we cast these adult actors, went out and bought a suit, did a whole casting call, and we started shooting this film. It was like maybe 2-3 days in when we found out that our lead villain, had gone to jail for something. And so we're all like standing on set, in the middle of this forest, ready to shoot this awesome scene with this villain of this evil cult. And the guy doesn't show up because he's in jail. So I don't know. I was like an early example of all the crazy, unpredictable things that can happen. But I mean, there's unpredictable things that happen all the time. That is the nature of film, and I think that's what's fun about it too, because it's like the film itself, like the end product. The process itself is also this living, breathing thing that you have to be in rhythm with, and it's really part of the journey. It's rewarding part of the journey.
Cool.
Yeah.
So a little birdie told me that you're making a film that may be going on for the next 600 years. Can you tell me about that?
Oh man, what to say? Yeah. So I am making a film called, technically the name of the film is Film 1 ASAP, as slow as possible. The one being a marker for this first installment of the film. First installment of a series that I hope will go on for another 600 plus years. The film itself deals with time, our relationship with time, slowness, and long-term thinking. And what I hope to do with the film, with all the films that I make, at least in the last 10, 15 years, is I want the film, the journey of making the film, I want the film itself to be equally of as it is about the subject. I'm all about that. And what a missed opportunity and what a cop-out it would be if I wasn't also thinking long-term, if I also wasn't thinking about how this process could be slow for me as a filmmaker. So at the heart of the film, the As Slow as Possible film, is this story about a piece of music that's being performed in Halberstadt, Germany, which is like in the center of Germany, small, sleepy town in a former monastery church, medieval church. So at the heart of this film, As Slow as Possible, is the story of this performance of a piece of music that's been going on in Halberstadt, Germany since the year 2000 and will continue until the year 2640. So in total, it will have been played or performed for 639 years, and it's continuous. It never stops, except when they change the pipes. So every once in a while, every 2 to 7 years, depending on what the sheet music calls for, there's a really big ceremony that's done, where they bring in the pipe and they change the pipes out of this organ, and it changes the chord that the organ is playing. The whole world descends upon this little church in Halberstadt. All the major press outlets come, and people make pilgrimages from all over the world just to witness it. And so the idea is that the film series, I should say, the last installment of the film will culminate alongside the completion of the performance of this piece of music. So we'll see. We're just focusing on the first installment of the film right now and trying to do the best we can. But yeah, the idea is like future generations will kind of pick up the mantle and continue telling these stories, maybe find their own stories. But it's an important topic that I think we will need to talk about, to explore for many, many, many generations to come. So yeah, that's our way of kind of continuing the conversation, I guess.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. And I bet you my posterity will as well. So unfortunately, we're nearing the end of our conversation. So we ask this question to every guest before ending their interview. If you could go back in time and give your teenage self a piece of advice, what would you tell yourself?
I hate that question.
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, okay. I would tell the teenage version of myself that this journey that I'm on, that's scary, uncertain, uncomfortable, is part of the process, and that this journey will take the time that it needs to take for you to find who you are as an artist, who you are as a human. And yeah.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you again so much, Mr. Shen, for being here. To all our listeners, again, give a round of applause for Mr. Patrick Shen,
Thanks,
founder
Gian.
of Transcendental Films. You can visit him at www.transcendentalmedia.com or his Instagram at
Pat Shen.
Yeah. Thank you so much
All
for
right, thanks.
being with us. We hope you have a great rest of your day.